Hello guys, welcome to another unit review. Today we're covering Unit 7, Part 1. This is 1890 to 1945. This is an enormous unit with 17% of the exam. It covers a ton of content. We're going back a little bit, covering overlapping Unit 6. So we have the annexation of Hawaii, we have the Spanish-American War where the United States is going to become an empire, we have the progressive movement, we have the entry into World War I, we have the interwar period with the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, the New Deal, and then we will get into World War II, and then this unit ends in 1945 with the Yalta Conference with the dropping of the atomic bomb. So again, this unit covers a ton of content.
Came up and he was gone with the draft. He's in the army now, a-blowing.
As far as periodization goes, again, this thing is going to start with American imperialism in 1890. I covered that in the Unit 6 video, so I'm not going to go into super big detail about that stuff, but know that that is also included in this unit. And again, this unit is going to end with the end of World War II, so that's as far as you guys need to know for this test in 2020. But it's going to end with the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so make sure you know that this is the end of Unit 7.
Came up and he was gone with the draft. He's in the army now, a-blowing.
Let's talk some politics in Unit 7. So we begin with William McKinley, which we've talked about in past units, but do know that he's the the Spanish-American War president. He will be assassinated eventually, and his vice president, Theodore Roosevelt, is going to take over in 1901. Now, Teddy Roosevelt is a very progressive president. We'll get to some of the stuff that he passes here in a bit, but his replacement in 1909 is William Howard Taft, okay? Known for getting stuck in the bathtub, he is a big boy. Now, Taft is not as progressive as Roosevelt was. So here we see the Republican Party split into kind of a pro-business party, which kind of remain the Republicans, and then we get a new Bull Moose party under Theodore Roosevelt that is a more progressive party. So this is an important point for the Republican Party under Taft. Now, Taft is going to lose the election to Woodrow Wilson, who is a Democrat in 1913. He is going to campaign on a policy of isolationism and progressivism, okay? So he promises to stay out of the conflict in Europe in World War I, but obviously you guys know your history. They will eventually join into that war. You should know, politically, under his administration, we have the 17th Amendment passed, which is the direct election of senators. I'll talk more about that in a second. Now, Warren G. Harding is going to replace Wilson in 1921, and his presidency is kind of tainted by the Teapot Dome scandal, where Albert Bacon Fall, his Secretary of the Interior, is going to illegally loan out kind of like land that was reserved for the federal government. He's going to loan that land out for companies to get oil. And obviously that is a big no-no. The United States cannot be loaning federal land for oil, so that is a big deal. And Harding is again one of these new Republicans who mainly focuses on being pro-business. Next up, we have Calvin Coolidge, a Republican, again, a pro-business guy. And then after him, we have Herbert Hoover, who is another kind of laissez-faire, hands-off kind of pro-business president. Now, Unfortunately for Hoover, he is going to get hit with a depression in his first term, right, 1929. He's going to do a hands-off approach for most of his presidency. Near the end, he's going to try to do some reform and use the federal power to fix the problem, but it is too little too late, and he is known as kind of the Depression president. Remember Hoovervilles and all that stuff. Now he's going to get replaced by FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is a Democrat. Famous for running 4 terms as president. He's the reason that now it is limited to only 2 terms. He passes the New Deal, which I'll go into in more detail under the economy section. His presidency is tainted by the court packing scandal, where he famously tries to essentially pack the Supreme Court with people that he appoints by saying that if justices are a certain age, he can put a new justice in just in case for when that guy dies. So he tries to pack the court. Very unpopular. Congress is going to block him from doing that, but know about that controversy. Now this unit ends with Harry Truman. Roosevelt is going to die in his presidency, and Truman is going to be the guy who ends off this unit. He is the one who orders the bombs to be dropped on Japan. He's the one who ends World War II. Okay. You should know about his fair deal policy. I'll get into that in more detail in a second here.
Came up and he was gone with the draft. He's in the army now, a-blowing.
Now, foreign policy in Unit 7 is huge. We're going all the way back to the Spanish-American War, where the U.S. is going to become an empire by acquiring a couple colonies. I've covered that in Unit 6, but know about Guam, Philippines, Puerto Rico. We also have the Philippine-American War, again covered in previous videos, but that is when the Filipinos are going to try to get independence from their new overlords, the Americans. Kind of ironic twist there in history, and those Filipinos get put down pretty brutally in a guerrilla warfare. Now, we also see a new foreign policy as far as South America is concerned, okay? You may remember the Monroe Doctrine, where James Monroe says everyone, meaning Europe, stay out of South America. That is our territory. We have the Western Hemisphere, and we are going to protect it. Now, in Monroe's time, America's a pretty weak country, and so the Europeans kind of laugh at it and say that's pretty cute. But now, Teddy Roosevelt is going to have the big stick policy, where he is going to use the new American industrial power and new military to kind of tell Europe, hey, I got this big stick, and if you come mess around in this South America, the Western Hemisphere, you're going to get hit with this big old stick. So know about that change in foreign policy. We also have Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt again. He's going to mediate peace in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. Okay, the Ruskies and the Japanese are going to go to war over Port Arthur, a bit of territory, and they are going to have Roosevelt, who is president of the U.S., obviously, mediate that peace between these two countries, showing a shift from isolationism to kind of getting involved in global affairs. Now we also have the Panama Revolution. Okay, this if you had other or if you've studied U.S. history past this point, this is going to sound very familiar. But the U.S. is going to back an independence movement in Panama. They're going to have a revolution against Colombia. And that is going to make Panama an independent country. Now, part of the deal with the U.S. backing this independence movement is this Hay Bunau Varia Treaty, where the U.S. gets permanent possession of the Panama Canal Zone. So now the U.S. has building rights to build that very profitable canal there. We also have dollar diplomacy. Okay, this is Taft's kind of addition to the big stick policy in dollar diplomacy. Taft is going to use the big U.S. businesses and tariffs, to kind of control South America and other countries. Remember, he's a Republican businessman, and so he's going to use industry to control other countries, something that we still do in the United States today. Now that is pre-World War I. We're pretty isolationist pre-World War I. We don't want to get involved. Like I said, Wilson is going to run on an isolationist platform. That is all going to change. Well, it's going to start to change with the sinking of the Lusitania, a passenger ship that gets sunk that's carrying some Americans by a German submarine, and Americans are going to get pretty pissed about that. That is not the final thing that gets America involved in the war. That will be the Zimmermann telegram, okay, where the Germans tell the Mexicans, if you invade America in the south, we will give you back that land you lost in the Mexican-American War. And that is going to be what causes the U.S. to join. Now, the U.S. is going to send a ton of fresh troops to World War I in Europe, and the Americans are going to help end the war with those fresh supplies and troops. And when they do that, Wilson is going to try to pass these 14 points to find peace in the world, to never have a war again. And it's kind of progressivism as foreign policy. And part of his 14 points is he wants to have a League of Nations where that blocks the world from having war ever again. And ironically, Congress is going to block the U.S. from joining the League of Nations, even though Wilson created it. So know that drama. Now, in the interwar years, we do have a Washington Naval Conference, 1921 to 22. This is a disarmament conference where a bunch of nations come to America, come to Washington, and they say, hey, we need to decrease our naval ships. We all need to calm down. We don't need another war. This is to ease tensions between Japan and China. So know about that. Again, America trying to find peace and trying not to go to war. We also have the Kellogg-Briand Pact in 1928, which is going to outlaw war globally, which clearly does not work at all. The last thing in this interwar period is the Stimson Doctrine, where the U.S. is not going to recognize any states created as a result of war, which is ironic given how America was formed and the number of wars it took to create the boundaries we have today. But what this is trying to do is tell foreign countries that if they conquer new lands, the U.S. is not going to recognize that as part of the conquering nation's territory. So again, it's trying to block war through diplomacy, a very Wilsonian idea, kind of idealistic, which obviously is not going to work out in the end. Now, in World War II, you should know that we have a new policy under FDR towards South America called the Good Neighbor Policy. And U.S., instead of patronizing South America and walking around with a big old stick and a big economy, FDR is going to try to treat South America as equals and say that we are neighbors and we should look out for each other. This is due partly to the rising tensions in Europe. And FDR is worried that if these South American countries are going to get influenced by Nazi Germany or Japan, they may attack the U.S. So this is his strategy to protect the Western Hemisphere from any conflict that's happening in Europe and Asia. Now, again, the U.S. is very isolationist. You should know about the Neutrality Acts of the 1930s. First, we say that we're not going to sell any goods to any belligerents over in Europe or Asia. Then it gets a little lax, and they say that you can have cash and carry for weapons and armaments. And so, like for instance, Britain and France can buy weapons and ships and things from America, but they have to come with cash and they have to carry it out of American ports on their own ships. Now again, this is going to get even looser with the Lend-Lease Act of 1941. Now, instead of cash and carry, the Allies can borrow weapons from the U.S. on a loan, okay? Or they can lease tanks and ships and things like that from the U.S. as long as they return them after the war. So you can see the U.S. kind of gradually gets more and more involved. Finally, we have Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. Japan is going to do a surprise attack on a U.S. port in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and that is going to cause the U.S. to enter World War II on the Allied side. It's also going to cause some domestic turmoil with internment camps. America is going to pass the Executive Order 9066, and they are going to intern or kind of imprison Japanese Americans in these camps in places like Manzanar. And the goal there is to protect vital areas in America like bases and factories and things like that, okay? So know about Japanese internment. Finally, the end of the war, we have the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You should know about the debates that happen over this bombing. You should also know about the outcome, which is basically the Cold War is going to start because America is kind of flexing on Russia with our new technology, the atomic bomb.
Came up and he was gone with the draft. He's in the army now, a-blowing.
With the economy in Unit 7, I'm going to break it up into pre-Great Depression and post-Great Depression. Now, pre-Great Depression economy is marked by the progressive movement. So we're going to see the increase of the U.S. government getting involved in controlling that economy and taking it away from those Gilded Age big business men. Now, the first example I have here is the Standard Oil Company of New Jersey versus the U.S. That is when Standard Oil, this huge oil monopoly in the United States, is going to get broken up and made into, I believe it's 36 smaller oil businesses. And so you can see the beginning of the U.S. Breaking up these big businesses of the Gilded Age. We also have the 16th Amendment, which is when the government says, hey, we're going to tax your income, Americans, and we need these taxes in order to pay for lawyers and the bureaucracy of breaking up monopolies and also Federal Reserve and all that stuff I'll talk about here in a second. In that same year, we have the Federal Reserve Act passed, which is going to create basically the third bank of the United States. So remember, Jackson had the war on the second bank. The Federal Reserve is the basically a national bank that we still have to this day. Now, the Federal Reserve is going to control inflation in the U.S., which is basically going to control the entire economy. So you can see again the federal government strengthening its hold on the American economy. We also have the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914, which is going to beef up that older, less effective Sherman Antitrust Act so the federal government can break up these big monopolies. We have the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, which is going to be a trust-busting body, meaning it is a government organization that is made to find and break up these big monopolies. Finally, we have the Revenue Act of 1924, which is where the government is going to cut federal tax rates. So you can see even among all these progressive things, we still have some more conservative ideas of cutting taxes in America. Now, post-Great Depression, you should know about the stock market crash of 1929. Obviously, that's very important. Stocks in America are going to be bought on credit, so you could buy $100 worth of stocks with just $10 at this time. So people are buying stocks like crazy, and a panic hits. Everyone goes, oh no, my stocks are basically worth nothing, so they sell off everything they can. Prices fall. There are businessmen who literally jump out of windows and buildings and kill themselves because all their money is stuck in this stock market, and it all crashes at once. Now, this stock market crash is going to lead to the Great Depression, obviously. There's some other factors as well, but we're going to see the American economy start to tank for a couple years here until World War II. Now, in order to kind of pad the crash of 29, the government is going to pass the Smoot-Hawley Tariff of 1930, and this puts taxes on goods coming into the U.S. from other countries. The idea is that people will buy from American businesses more, and our economy will get boosted up once again. Now, this fails, it's going to create a trade war between a bunch of different nations, and basically this is going to spread, this tariff is going to spread the depression to the whole entire planet, and it's going to become a global depression because of this tariff here. Not good. We also have the Reconstruction Finance Corporation in 1932, and that's going to give loans to businesses. It's going to give money to state and local governments to try to help out the situation. This is one of these things that are under Hoover, but again, too little too late. Doesn't really work as he hoped. Now, FDR is going to get into office, and he is going to start the New Deal, which is based on 3 R's: relief, recovery, reform. This is relief for the poor, reform of businesses, recovery of industry, okay? And so he's going to pass things under what we call the alphabet soup, the CCC, TVA, the NIRA, AA, all these programs that are all built to get people out and working. Things like building trails in national parks, building monuments, all kinds of things like that. He's also going to pass the Social Security Act, which gives money to retired folks. So maybe ask your grandma or grandpa if they're under Social Security. They probably are, where they get a check from the federal government every month. So a very progressive move there. He's also going to pass the Wagner Act, which is going to offer protections for unions so that Americans can continue to unionize against these big businesses and protect the workers. We also have the Dust Bowl, adding to the drama of the Great Depression, where topsoil in the Midwest, the soil in general, is overused, and that causes the topsoil of all this farmland to get picked up in these big storms during a drought, and it blows all over the Midwest, causing massive destruction for crops. So not only do we have a stock market in the East Coast in cities, we also see the Dust Bowl in the Midwest. Now, the New Deal, historians argue about this quite a bit, but for what I have read, the New Deal didn't really pull us out of the Great Depression. It was really World War II and the production of military equipment that we were selling to the Allies. So keep that in mind when we talk about the end of the Great Depression. Really, it's World War II, not so much all these New Deal programs.
Came up and he was gone with the draft. He's in the army now, a-blowing.
Now, expansion in Unit 7. Again, this covers the annexation of Hawaii, the Spanish-American War and those new territories, the Philippine-American War, which we've discussed all those in the last video. But do know that the America of isolationism is kind of over, okay? Now we are an empire, we have all this territory overseas, and so we now become kind of like an old school European country. We could become one of the big boys with new territory. Now that is the end of part 1. I will cover part 2 later with Native Americans, African Americans, some social and cultural stuff for Unit 7. But I hope you guys are doing okay. Make sure you're studying, stay safe, wear protection when you go to Walmart with your masks.